please talk about what the design of the connection machine, the way it looked, what did it mean to you and to other people that you knew in the company? Did it make a difference, or could it have been just another refrigerator?
I think the design itself was integral to the whole kind of experience that we had as working together as a company. I think that at Thinking Machines we had graphic artists, we had physicists, we had chemists, we had computer scientists, we had a chef. We created a whole culture of multidisciplinary activity, and the design is what made us all proud. If it had just been another blank computer or whatever, it would not have inspired us. I mean, we felt that the design was, I loved walking into a room and seeing a connection machine. And the lights were very important, and because it was a statement about computing and about aspiration and clean lines, and everything about the design reinforced what we were trying to do. I think so.
When I was coming up with the design, conceiving the design, I was coming from childhood, if you will, of reading science fiction. And so even though my involvement with science didn't start until I was an undergraduate, a freshman at Stanford, and working at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center studying physics, I still had that teenager indoctrination maybe in all the images of science fiction, the images of human-machine symbiosis that was going to enable us to do more things. And so a lot of that flowed into how I wanted to make the machine appear. Did that come across?
Yeah, it appeared like a machine out of the future. I mean, it really was forward-looking, and as if this work of art, this obelisk, 2001, this kind of computer made a statement visually that I think that we all, it led to us wanting to do, take it to the limit. To, again, one of the things we had was to think differently at that time about data, and the machine and the design that you came up with was a cube of cubes, which made it easier for us to explain to other people what it was, because it had this composability to it, and the fact that when we talked about hypercubes and everything else, it was a part of that design. It was also animated, the fact that we had lights on it. We would kid ourselves about it, because initially they did have a purpose in allowing us to debug some things at a very low hardware level. But instead it gave the machine a personality too. And so and it was a personality we could program. And that we could, and working with the machine, we also had another wonderful machine in the beginning, which was the Lisp machine, which is sort of the Cadillac of a workstation. Ergonomically, it was great, and so you had one of the best personal computers connected to the most powerful computer in the most advanced design at that time. I thought it just fed upon itself.
What was very important to me as the product designer on the connection machine was that the lights were not decorative, they were not an add-on, they were not a panel, which unfortunately I think on the CM5...
In the CM5 they became controlled by a separate microcontroller.
And it was a separate panel, I think that was...
Yes, it was a separate panel, but initially they were the lights on the edge of the board.
Right, on the CM1, CM2 design.
CM2.
And that's what I felt was needed to convey that this was a, so to speak, living, breathing, thinking machine, that you were seeing its internal life through the translucent doors.
Yeah, and the fact that it was translucent, so there was something going on inside. All of those elements of the design worked. And it also helped, quite frankly, these were multi-million-dollar machines. So it better look like it's a multi-million-dollar machine, because the institutes and everything that's bought this would generally build a special room just for the machine. And the machine looked like it was thinking. because the lights were flashing. I know right now that they exist in museums, and it always makes me sad because I don't see the lights blinking. I don't hear the fans whirring, and so that the life, the animation of the machine, they look dead in a museum. Whereas with the lights going and with the sound of the fans and everything else, you could feel it computing, and that was an integral part of it. Even in some of the early design, some of the programs that we used, you would see certain patterns according to what part of the program the machine was in. And it wasn't a direct relationship and everything else, but it was very much, you could see whether something was a problem or whether you could try to do some diagnosis through the lights themselves. So it was a functional part of the design that added to its character.
Can you explain what that might have looked like?
Oh, you would see either patterns repeating itself. And so as programs would go, the lights were initially connected to the event loop of the innermost processing. So every time it would go through one of the instruction cycles, the light would be either on or off, depending upon a bit in that process. And so you would see that for every process that was on the board. So it was, but it was more than anything else, it animated what was a pretty lifeless machine. And the fact that everything was symmetric about the machine, it was a cube of cubes, that made it have presence in any room. And when we then went to storage, we did the same thing with a data vault. Again, this was one of the earliest RAID designs where we applied parallelism to storage. And again, then that was designed again as a black box that had a curvature. Why did it have a curvature? Purely for design.
So,
and that made this something again have a real presence about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I had initially hoped that people would use the lights in a way that could debug it, and then I think now I need to go back and start collecting stories from that. Mary Lou Jepson, who was dealing with holography, just told me something I got to record, where she said when what became the Media Lab got their first machine, that there was a data out problem. It wasn't fast enough, and she said, "Well, it's got lights. Speed of light's pretty good." And then they
could actually program the lights itself.
Well, and they read directly off the lights to get the data out at a much higher speed than you could get through the wires.
But I think that also, the whole notion of design was built into the company. I think Cheryl Handler in particular, given her background in architecture and other things, we spent a lot of time. I remember, I think, repainting like 5 or 6 different times the showroom where we were going to announce the machine, because she wanted exactly the right feel or whatever for that design. So we were all, design was sort of built into all of us. I mean, we were very proud of that, and it influenced a lot of our work, whether you were a hardware engineer or a software engineer. Design was a part of it.
Can you be more explicit about how what's essentially a visual design would influence the software or hardware designer?
I think it was more the design aesthetic, about it being clean, about it being simple and powerful. Those were the things, I think, when we were designing code, we wanted to have that same sort of design principles. The spaghetti code was the opposite. We didn't want any of that. We wanted something that was, the simpler the code, the better. The cleaner the code, the more transparent the code. More powerful. When we created languages, we wanted very powerful constructs in the language itself. All of those things sort of ping-ponged around between programmers and designers and everything else. We had part of what we were doing also was about computer graphics. So we were designing films, and we were using computer animation, because using a massively parallel supercomputer to do animation, we could do that in near real time. And so Carl Sims and others, and the fact that we had an artist in residence working on that next to physicists or chemists or anything else, created the kind of culture that we wanted in the company itself.
Interesting. So you see that as a very different culture as other companies that you worked with?
Oh, very much so. I haven't seen it recreated again. I think it may exist in probably in Google and other companies today that allow the kind of breadth of experience, but there it was very explicit right from the start that that's what we were about.
Interesting. Okay, thanks for the stories.
Sure.
This is great to hear.